Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Well, everyone is to be congratulated, put in a good effort for these days of practice. Something to take forward as we disperse and go our various ways. Remember that the practice of the path is not limited to when we're sitting on the meditation cushion. Meditation is only a part of the path. It's an important part. We need that. I sometimes wonder how people manage to get through life without meditating. Doesn't seem to me really possible. But meditation is, after all, a kind of artificial exercise. We are setting conditions for ourselves when we meditate that make it easier to have a calm, clear, peaceful mind. And we can see by the experiment that even with the ideal conditions set up, it's sometimes not so easy. So we need that grounding so that we can have a base of calmness and clarity to take forward into more difficult circumstances of various complications of our life, our relations with others, our duties, our various concerns and issues that we are facing in our lives. We need that core of calm and stability. If you've got a calm center if you've found that, you've got a place of genuine refuge. So it's first of all important to find that calm, clear center and establish it strongly so that it's always available. One way of understanding this is to center oneself in the knowing mind, in the citta. The citta, spoken of often in the Thai forest tradition, is that aspect of being, the simple knowing. And that's really all that it does. There's a Zen story about two monks disputing about the nature of mind. And one of them says that the mind is like a bright mirror set up in a high place that illuminates the 10,000 things, and they are reflected in its face. And the other one says, that's close, but I don't think you quite got it. The mind is like a bright mirror set up in a high place that illuminates the 10,000 things. but nothing is reflected in its face thereby. The chitta in its activity, it knows all things. Everything that we experience is known by the chitta. That's what being conscious, being awake is. But because of the pristine simplicity of the chitta, it can neither be purified nor defiled. It just is the knowing. So it knows sadness, it knows happiness, it knows fear, it knows anxiety, but it's not happy or sad or fearful or anxious. It cannot be. And this, if you can find the way to center yourself in the chitta, this is the unfoldment. It's a place of peace, and it's a place of the unfoldment of wisdom. Ajahn Punnadhammo called it our true home. In the Abhidhamma, there is this distinction in the mind between the two aspects of mind, the chitta and chittasika. Chitta is mind in its pristine essence, the simple knowing. Chittasika, which means the associates of chitta, are all the activities of mind. All the thinking and emoting and remembering and desiring and willing, all these activities of mind are objective relative to the chitta. The chitta is the purely subjective. When we go off that center point and we identify with the objects of consciousness, then this inevitably leads to confusion and bewilderment and suffering. We've lost the clear center. Now we're off in the periphery of the being, and we're going to experience some degree of turmoil or another. So you should endeavor to recognize the objects of consciousness, the processes going on of thinking and emoting and remembering, and see them objectively. Don't identify with them. Don't take ownership of them. See them as empty. See them as conditional. See them as without ultimate reality, without substance. This is one of the most important skills to learn, is not taking our mind state seriously. It can help to have some sense of humor about them. Here's just this silly idea of coming up again. I don't have to believe it. I don't have to act on it. I don't have to let it disturb my peace. When you can see the mind states as empty and conditional, then you can see them objectively and decide from a place of wisdom what if they have any value or not. It's so easy for beings to get caught in their mind states. Can cause a great deal of suffering. A great deal of suffering in the world is purely due to mental formations. When you consider that a mental formation is really without any reality, without any substance, it's kind of unbelievable in a way that people get caught in that, but it's so easy to do because they're so close to us. They're part of our essence, but they're essentially not real. Another thing regarding mental formations to watch out for is to, without taking them seriously or taking ownership of them, you should take responsibility for them in this sense that not to blame circumstances or other beings for your mental states. It's of no value to say, well, I can't help it, he always makes me so angry. Even if he, whoever it is acting very unskillfully, that's on him, that's his mental state. But your reaction to it is your mental state. You don't have to follow that. You can choose to be free of that. And try to avoid getting caught up in reaction to changing circumstance, particularly the 8 worldly dhammas: pleasure and pain, gain and loss, fame and dishonor, praise and blame. If you value these things and give them importance, then your mind will always be a roller coaster ride of temporary thrill followed by misery. Try and find that independence of mind, that liberated mind that's not, that the peace and the tranquility and the equanimity of the mind is not dependent on external circumstances. That's the place of true freedom, vimutti, liberation, the breaking of the bonds of samsara. And take refuge in everything you've learned I know many of you are well studied in the Dhamma. You know the various lists and teachings. To begin with, keep the sila, the 5 precepts. This is your protection. Approaching the precepts, remember the phrasing of them in the Pali, Samadhiyami Sikapadani. I will endeavor to walk this way of training. It's a different spirit than a commandment. It's like wise advice. If you follow this path of training, if you train yourself in this way, behaving in an ethical way in the world, then your life here and now will be easier, smoother, happier, less conflicted. And you're creating good karma for the future. I like to think of the precepts as like the owner's manual for human form. It's like when you buy a new car, you get in the glove box, you get an owner's manual, and it has various advice. Like change the oil every 5,000 kilometers. You can choose to ignore that, but then you won't get the best use of your car. You'll soon be paying for expensive repairs. You'll be sorry you didn't follow the advice in the owner's manual. So when we have the good fortune to have taken a human birth, which is a very rare and fortunate occurrence in the whole field of samsara, it behooves us to live that life that we've earned by our previous karma to make the best use of this opportunity. And to begin with, that's keeping the 5 precepts as a foundation. Without sila, none of the other teachings are going to bear much fruit. So sila is the foundation stone, and on that we build bhavana, mental development, which we've been focusing on these last 3 days. And that includes meditation as a core aspect, but guarding and developing our mind is a continual lifetime effort. Our state of mind is our most precious resource. And we need to foster and work on having a healthy, useful, bright mind. We need to encourage those mental qualities that provide for greater freedom, greater wakefulness, greater happiness, and not follow those mental states that lead us down into despair and anxiety and fearfulness. the highest third aspect of the path is wisdom, panya. Wisdom in the Buddhist teaching is seeing according to reality and not otherwise. And its foundation is truthfulness, satya. And truthfulness means being truthful in our speech, but it also means being truthful to ourselves, not tolerating delusion or falsity in our own being, not seeking comforting illusion, which in the end falls apart and causes greater suffering, but seeing clearly and fearlessly the reality. And seeing things as they actually are in the last analysis means seeing things according to the characteristics, the tailakkhana of emptiness, impermanence, and suffering or imperfection. And that is also an ongoing work, and that can be formalized as a practice of vipassana. And I've mostly, in this retreat, I've mostly been emphasizing samatha practice. I thought that's very useful for 3 days. But I'll say a few words about vipassana that you can take forward. Vipassana means clear seeing, and I think the first thing to understand is that it's not really a specific technique of meditation. There are several different ways of doing vipassana, but they are methods of accessing this state of mind, the state of mind of clear seeing, which is based on equanimity and non-attachment, non-identification. An important aspect of vipassana is a precision of mind, that objects are seen clearly in their own nature, with this calm centeredness. If we get caught in the objects, in mental formations or sense impressions, then we've gone off the path of vipassana. We're wandering in delusion. And I think that, as I said, there are many different techniques available for trying to access a state of mind. But there are really, I think, two broad categories of ways of approach in different directions. One is what I think what most people will recognize as vipassana are various methods of formalized techniques of meditation that deal with the objects of consciousness. And this is particularly associated with a Burmese tradition. There have been several prominent schools of Vipassana that have come out of Burma. Mahasi tradition, which I'm most familiar with. Also Goenka, Paok, and there are others that are less known in the West. And they share the characteristic of paying attention closely to the objects of consciousness. And one sees the objects precisely, singularly, and penetrates their nature. The other approach, which is more associated with the Thai forest tradition, is to center the mind in the chitta, in the knowing, and let the processes unfold without moving from that center point. And then the objects become clear and are known. Now, these are two different ways of speaking about it, but when the practice is perfect, there's no difference between them. If you're clearly observing the objects, then you have to be centered in the knowing. If you're centered in the knowing, the objects will be clear. And this is the last duality to be transcended, the subject-object duality. There's the knowing and there's the known. And when that is pure, and that's all that's happening, there's no third besides. There's no self. There's no one doing it. There's simply an object arising and the knowing of the object. And in that place, there's the possibility of final liberation. And the mind gets to that point where there is simply the knowing of the objects. Then samsara begins to run down. In our ordinary mind, we keep continually creating samsara through the process of desire or craving. The mind craves the objects. And samsara is at its simplest, it is this, the mind creating an object arising, and the mind not being satisfied and craving the next object. And normally beings are bewildered by this process. And they're driven backwards and forwards by fear and fascination, ultimately. But with clear insight, the objects are seen in their own nature as ultimately unsatisfying. And this motive force of the desire begins to wane. This is viraga, this passion. And then this process continues for some time. Even when after we cease feeding it, it will run on for a time, like if you turn the engine off in your car, but you don't hit the brakes, it'll still roll for a while before it runs down. But it becomes more tenuous and less sticky. And this eventually allows the mind to do that which it has not done since beginningless time, and alight upon non-occurrence, to quote the words of the Sugimagga. It does that which it has not done since beginningless time and alights upon non-occurrence. And then the game is over. The goal has been reached. This is a realization of Nibbana. So I'll conclude with that, and may you all prosper in your practice, and may you attain to the highest goal in this very life.